Welcome everyone. We are just giving everyone a moment to get online and join us for our DMS Future Proof webinar, Restaurant Innovation and Reopening, with a very special guest. We will be with you momentarily. I see we have some participants already joining us online. We'll give everyone one more minute in this very intensive Zoom and conference call world that we live in. Give everyone one more moment. All right, we are 2 minutes after 3, so we are going to jump right in. Welcome to everyone joining us online. I am Sonia Shorey, and I'm very excited to serve as the Vice President, Strategy, Marketing, and Communications for Invest Ottawa and Bayview Yards. Welcome to our webinar, our Digital Main Street Future Proofing webinar, Restaurant Innovation and Reopening, with our very special guest, Howie Khan, who is joining us from Brooklyn, New York. Why are we hosting today's webinar and what is DMS all about? We wanted to take a moment to share a little bit of background with you. I am confident that many of you that are joining us today are restaurateurs, retailers, service provider, trades-based businesses that are struggling to find your way forward during COVID-19. We know the pandemic has devastated many of our small independent businesses that line our main streets. You are the heart of our neighborhood. Our goal, with critical support from the Government of Canada through FedDev Ontario, together with the province and many friends and colleagues from Toronto, the original architects of many parts of the Digital Main Street program, Kitchener, Waterloo, and Northern Ontario, we are joining forces to do everything we can to help Main Street companies not just simply survive the pandemic, but thrive in the new economy. What are we here to do through Digital Main Street? Ultimately, we are here to help you get online, get selling, generating revenue, attracting new customers so that you can continue to build your business and thrive. I want you to consider us your personal digital marketing agency. We know that those resources are typically very costly. This is completely free to you. All of the services that we are offering through Digital Main Street or DMS are at no cost to the Main Street businesses that we are here to serve in all of those sectors, whether you're hospitality and restaurants, retailers, service, or other types of vendors that line our main streets. So what exactly does that mean? What are we going to do for you? You might need a new website, or perhaps you have a website and you need new e-commerce capabilities, or you'd like to develop an app that will help you to broaden your market reach. We can help you with that. Do you need a digital marketing strategy? All the photography, videos, ads, all of that social media, how do you make it really work for you and your business so that you can target the type of customers in this new environment? We are here to help. We can help you apply for digital grants that can put money in your hands as long as you're eligible to actually go and develop some of that new capability and purchase the technology that you need to take it even further. And how are we going to do this? Multitude of ways. We have digital marketing squads, the talented people that are going to be at your disposal to help you build and create that new strategy, those new websites, and make them sing. This is everything from mentors, digital marketing professionals and experts, and some fantastic student talent from our local region who will be at your disposal at no cost to you to help you build all of those capabilities. We're going to be hosting training sessions, webinars, and peer groups that have actually already started, building on some of the great work and advice that you're about to hear from Howie Khan today, doing a deep dive within your sector to understand how COVID-19 has impacted you and what it will take to rebuild your business in the new economy. Many of those roundtables are rolling every single week, and we are here to make sure that you can capitalize on them. The next one will be featuring on retail, and it is tomorrow, Tuesday at 2 p.m. And if you need more information, you can reach out right to me on LinkedIn, Sonia Shorey at Invest Ottawa. We also encourage anyone who is interested in being a part of the Digital Main Street program to go to digitalmainstreet.ca. All you need to do is register, and our team will ensure that you get the support you need when you need it, where you need it. And now, without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Howie Khan, who joins us from Brooklyn, New York. Big thank you to Stephen Bechta, one of our legendary restaurateurs, who brought this gentleman forward to us and said we need to connect with him. He's got incredible insight and information to share, an award-winning journalist with high-profile publications like the New York Times, GQ, the Wall Street Journal, and many other publications. He's also entering his 70th episode for a very well-known podcast, Takeaway Only. He's one of the most provocative minds in this industry, and he is here to answer your questions and share all of the insight about rebuilding your business as a restaurateur in this very challenging environment. Howie, welcome to Invest Ottawa, to Digital Main Street, and to our Ottawa community. Thank you for joining us. Over to you.
Sonia, thank you so much for that incredible and generous introduction. It's really interesting for me to hear about all the things you guys are doing. I wish I was living in Ottawa so I could take advantage of your services too. I am a journalist. My name is Howie Khan, as Sonia mentioned. I am also a small business owner, so it's an interesting time for me in two different ways, both in terms of the business I'm trying to build in the podcast production arena and in terms of the beat I've always covered for the last 20 years, which is hospitality and food and restaurants and the people who, you know, make that incredible world work and bring the hospitality to everyone who enjoys it. So when COVID-19 started to shut down all the restaurants in New York and across America, my team and I quickly realized that it would be incredibly valuable to build a series around the experiences of people in the business and how restaurants were going about shutting themselves down so they could eventually open themselves back up in a sustainable, future-facing way. The program we came up with is called Takeaway Only, and the name kind of means two things. It was in reference to so many different places starting a takeaway model immediately before anybody even knew what that was. And it was also a way for me to gather the sort of philosophical and emotional and narrative takeaway from all the people who are going through this moment. So that's how we conclude every show, by hearing somebody's crystallized pieces of advice. And, it changes a lot because we started this on March 20th and it is now almost August. We've done an episode almost every weekday since then. We're going into episode 70 this week. So, I've heard a variety of different takeaways about building, your team in better ways, trusting your gut even more, learning that systems that were built aren't gonna be the ones to carry us into the future. It's been one of the biggest honors of my career to cover this story in such a close and intimate way. So I know that, those of you who are listening to this webinar today are, the audience and also the subjects. So thank you so much for being here today. One of the first things I want to talk about are some of the earliest findings, because I think to talk about the moment that we're in right now, this moment of potential, reopening and economic growth, we kind of have to go back and reflect on what happened only a few short months ago. We were all part of a community that was open and thriving, and then it just closed, ground to a halt, came to an immediate stop. One of the first things I first started noticing in episodes that took place across America, and it was very important to have this kind of geographical diversity for one very important reason, and that is that no matter where we are, we're all in this together. The stories from Seattle can help the people in Indianapolis. The stories in Indianapolis can help the people in Detroit. So one of the first places we started was in Seattle with a restaurant group called, a restaurant family called the Canlis family. They are third generation restaurateurs, Mark and Brian Canlis. They run the restaurant that their grandfather started decades ago. Seattle was one of the first places in America to really have a COVID outbreak. So Canlis was one of the first high profile restaurants in America to really mount a notable and press-worthy response. It's a fine dining restaurant that very quickly turned into a boxed food restaurant and a bagel stand and a burger joint. And it was then in March that it was pretty obvious that the way through this was through incredible hustle and incredible creativity. From there, we moved on to talk to an incredible restaurateur in Indianapolis named Martha Hoover, who has, or at the time of the breakout of the pandemic, I think over a dozen restaurants in the Indianapolis area. And, you know, she's been dealing with landlord issues basically since March, but she's come through this and has opened up a new concept in the last couple of weeks called Apocalypse Burger. And she spent some of the time fighting, also building something new. George Azar, who's a restaurateur in Detroit, who runs one of the more unlikely restaurant narratives I've ever heard, in that he is a Palestinian-American chef cooking Vietnamese food in a predominantly Mexican restaurant in the predominantly Black city of Detroit. Has been trying to, you know, reach his community and work within the community the entire time he's been open, and to help people understand his food and to make himself a cornerstone of where he is. And he was just kind of gaining, you know, real traction, and then this shut everything down. So it's like, how do you tell that story and interact with all the people who you've been trying to build bridges with while you're closed? And the answer for him was just delivery. He's open now with some outdoor stuff, but there was, you know, this very evident gritty hustle and this inspiring way of, you know, we're going to make this work. We're going to show up. We're going to keep people safe. And we're going to keep doing it, right? So this was the first 3 episodes. I mean, emotionally, it was enough to hear about for a year. It became evident also that restaurants were fighting for their lives and would have to continue to do so. Again, the idea behind a show that covers a broad geographic base meant international shows also, right? I'm in New York, but it was important also to talk to restaurateurs in Copenhagen to see what they were dealing with, and organizations in Rio de Janeiro, and even neighboring Fort Erie, Ontario, near you guys, where, you know, a fairly well-known chef, a very well-known chef, opened, you know, a barbecue pop-up that he never expected to open, because we're living in a time where new revenue sources have to pop up, where even if you're on the internet and have a popular YouTube show, your restaurants are still suffering, and new things need to happen. It was interesting hearing how chefs in Copenhagen had a tremendous advantage in terms of government aid packages that we didn't have here in America, and to learn about things like bailouts and, you know, government organizations taking care of an industry that had clearly fallen off a cliff. Rocio's episodes, you know, incredible in that way, in terms of, you know, offering an international perspective on, you know, the relationship between government and restaurants, which I think a lot of people hadn't necessarily focused on too heavily before, but now you're seeing organizations all around the world popping up in which independent restaurants are having a closer connection to their government representatives, because it's necessary. Here in America, there's still, you know, bills on the table that may or may not be passed, that may save the industry and may not come to its rescue at all. it was interesting for me to hear about Nikki Grichka, who runs an organization in Rio de Janeiro called Refetorio Gastromotiva, where they've been working really hard over the last several years to feed members of their community who don't have food. And a lot of the food is donated, and a lot of the stuff that, you know, supermarket chains don't want because it's ugly produce end up here. And so how do you keep those supply chains open during a time of pandemic when people are meant to stay away from each other and when the pipeline starts closing down? So episodes like that, I think, offer an interesting lesson in just how to deal with unexpected logistics, which is something I'm sure you all are dealing with now every day, and are just kind of learning to both roll with the punches and to fight against them and to figure out how things are going to work for you now. So that's kind of the background of the show and some of the lessons that came across in the, you know, the first few weeks in the early period. Now, as we're kind of flashing forward, one of the first thing to obviously focus on is the idea of safety in restaurants, right? There's not going to be any path to reopening for very long if things aren't safe, if restaurants aren't seen as a safe place, both for the diner and for all the people who work there. I know it's from talking to dozens and dozens of chefs all around the world. You know, one of the things that constantly comes up is, when do people feel good asking their staff to come back to work? When is it a risk? When is it not? And the fact of the matter is, we're dealing with a very unpredictable virus that has its own way of spreading quickly and dangerously. And until there's a vaccine, you know, there's no real guarantees. So the pre-safety step, you know, that I hear about over and over again is coming to terms with the comfortability of the staff and who wants to come back to work, who's able to, who feels good about it, who's not suffering from pre-existing health conditions, who's not particularly vulnerable to COVID. So I think over and over again, I hear about chefs and restaurateurs having, you know, very personal conversations with their staff members about health issues that they wouldn't have had in a pre-COVID era. And while it's unfortunate that so many people of us are talking about virus in the workspace, I do think this is an interesting moment to open up channels of communication about issues that maybe were seen as more private and personal before, and using this as an opportunity to really know the people who you're working with and who are working for you. So that's the pre-safety step. One of the things I'm seeing that I think is really important is transparency and protocol being released to the public, both for the benefit of people who are running restaurants and people who go to restaurants. I've read these documents that I'm going to tell you about as a consumer. I don't run a restaurant. I'm not in the kitchen. This is a beat I cover, and I'm very interested into what's safe and protocols that are being established. But honestly, I'm even more interested as a diner who is, you know, wanting to go back to these places and wanting to feel safe in that way. So World Central Kitchen, which is an organization I admire greatly, founded by the chef Jose Andres in Washington, D.C., as you know, a humanitarian aid effort to feed people who need food, whether it's after an earthquake or a hurricane or a tsunami or a fire, or during a pandemic, has done so many things in the last couple of years. And one of the things that's most shareable and most actionable is this safety first pamphlet, I guess. It's almost 50 pages, so slightly longer. It's a small book, actually, and it was written in cooperation with the Aspen Institute Food and Society and Off Their Plate, which is a great organization out of Boston, and the James Beard Foundation in New York. The link is below. It's up on your screen. This is downloadable. Anybody can see it, and I think it's a great thing to kind of go through as a checklist to share with the people you work with and to share with the people in your community. It has information on everything from organizing arrival of staffers, to mask use, to how to receive packages, to how to break down the restaurant at the end of the night or the end of the day, to how to space out your seating. how to do takeout, how to become more involved with your community by making, mass amounts of meals that will be offered for free. So I think I highly recommend spending some time with this document, sharing it with, whoever. It's a gesture of kindness to share this thing, really. So highly recommend checking it out. Another thing I like that I'm seeing across the industry is I'm seeing different restaurant groups release their protocols, also making it available to everybody who works with and for them, and to, again, the general public. I can't stress enough how important this is that it works both ways. I think that the patrons of a restaurant are so used to the idea of being cared for and being safe. And I think we've all been kind of robbed of that safety. So I think reestablishing that connection and showing that it's still going to be there and that it's going to be different, but that it's going to be there nonetheless is really important. I think that, I think there used to be maybe this separation between church and state where maybe you wouldn't share your entire safety protocol with your diners. But I think now there's sort of a more information, the better thing going on. This is from David Chang's Momofuku restaurant group, which operates restaurants in multiple countries and all over the United States. And this is, everything. This is everything from how COVID-19 spreads to protocols to washing your hands, wearing gloves, social distancing, PPE. There's kind of a nice narrative of a day in the life of a restaurant. There's information on dine-in and tableside service, which I know is a phase that I believe you guys are starting to experience now, the phase 3 there. I think dine-in is going to be slower than the ability to eat outside in the summer months, but I think this shows how to interface with the guest. And then it has tips for takeout and delivery and standard operating procedures. What I like about this is this document's updated fairly frequently and when it needs to be. So at the top of the document, you can see when you go into it when it was last updated, which has this nice quality that's the same as an expiration date on a package of meat or some such, because these protocols are essentially living things. They do move, they do change, the conditions don't stay the same. So I think being able to show the public and the people you work with that these things are being addressed almost constantly is an invaluable way of gaining trust across the board. Interestingly enough, I sat down in a restaurant the other day for the first time since March. It felt very strange to have gone that long without a restaurant meal. I'm someone who eats in restaurants frequently for my job and because I love them and because I know that they're such an important part of my neighborhood, and I like to support, the people who make my neighborhood excellent. And it was strange to be there. It was hard to get the mask on, every time someone approached the table. I constantly wanted to ask people how they were doing, who I didn't know. I wanted to extend hospitality to the people who were serving me, which is something I probably should have always been thinking about. But, you think about such a thing in more acute ways now. So I am very curious as to how that process is going to streamline itself and how to limit the amount of touch points within the service experience. Because I think it's very hard for servers to reapproach tables and for the mask to go on, for the mask to come off. So I'm constantly now looking for ways in which those touch points are limited, in which hospitality can feel like hospitality, but with less human interaction, essentially. I see my friend Kyle's popped up on the screen right now here, which means we have some questions that I think would be great to answer at this point before we go back to the slides.
Yeah, so just a friendly reminder to everyone on the line, if you do have any questions, so please feel free to input them in the Q&A section. And then periodically I will be popping up on your screen to ask Howie these questions. So the first one, Howie, comes in from Greg. So, hi, Howie. In your opinion, what do you think will replace the use of paper menus? Apps that customers will need to download to their smartphones, or web-based systems, not apps that can be downloaded from venue to venue?
I think part of this is art and part of it's technology. I think every restaurant's going to have to make a choice in terms of what they want to do. I think the easiest practice right now is to keep everything on people's own mobile devices. Everybody's on their own mobile devices throughout their meals anyways, taking pictures of their phone, sending texts to whoever they're texting, checking their Instagram. So I think that because this device is in hand anyways, I think that's probably the easiest place to convey this sort of information. And I think it can be done in some cool and artful ways, working with graphic designers. I mean, it's a whole new canvas to work on essentially for UX people and designers. So I'm looking forward to seeing how handheld menus work and how that's able to enhance the hospitality experience. I think it's already in people's hands. I think it's just a matter of working on the design and the back end.
Great, thank you. We have one more here. I don't know if we will be jumping the gun a little bit. So if you are talking about this later on, just feel free, we can put a pause on it, but I just wanted to bring it to your attention. So we have Reza asking, so I own 2 small restaurants in Ottawa and we have pivoted in a number of ways. I'm interested to hear, as restrictions lift, to what extent are businesses continuing with the pandemic model versus back to usual? And what about planning for a second wave or resurgence of COVID-19?
I think that's a great question. And I will be talking about that a little bit later, but I think now's a great time to talk about it also. I hope I can hear from all of you guys what your pivots have been at some point, because I'm really just interested. But I think that I don't necessarily look at this anymore as a pre-COVID-19 model and a post-COVID-19 model. I think what we've learned to do during this pandemic is going to be the model going forward. And I think one of the great lessons perhaps that we've learned is that who knows what to expect? Who knows what kind of curveball is going to be thrown at your business? I mean, the same kind of nimbleness and mobility to do something new and different could also help you if your kitchen floods or your restaurant catches fire, or if there's another kind of weather event or a war or another kind of pandemic, or who knows what's going to happen. So I think having the ability to do a variety of different things and knowing that you can get into that mode at any time, or you've just stayed in that mode, I think is going to give everybody some solace in terms of disaster proofing themselves. I think one of the things I saw over and over and over again and listened to is I heard restaurateurs talk about their lack of disaster management planning and their lack of contingency planning for when things went really wrong. And that ranged from everything to wanting to have a kind of slush fund available for employees to pay them when business stops, to having better insurance policies, to having more streams of revenue. So I think having had this time to learn is really invaluable. And I think the things we know now will continue to be part of the model going forward.
Great. And then I have a 2-part question here, and then maybe you can continue a little bit, and then I can come back to the Q&A.
Great.
But the 2-part question coming in from Stephen Becta. So,
hi, Stephen.
Yeah. When do you think the majority of restaurants' previous guests will feel comfortable dining inside again in areas with low COVID cases? So, for example, in Ottawa, 25 to 50 per day in a city of 1 million.
Yeah, I think this, the reaction to COVID is such a personal thing. And I know people who are reacting to this virus in ways they would have never expected to react to anything, myself included. Like, I'm gung-ho, Mr. Restaurant, support. And I have a really hard time leaving my house. It's really taxing on me and a lot of people I know emotionally to go places. So I don't know if there's any formula for when people are going to return. I think, unfortunately, with this public health crisis, we're also going to see an emerging mental health crisis that'll also affect how restaurants are able to seat people and are able to perform. I think one of the answers to that is having, other kinds of robust strategies to serve the diners that have always loved you and to who you've always loved. I had a carry-out dinner last night from Peter Luger in New York City. If you know New York City, Peter Luger is one of the great steakhouses. It's a business that's been around forever. It's meant a lot to its neighborhood and it's meant a lot to its city. And they have the most incredible bacon cheeseburger made with aged, aged meat and, this incredible thick cut bacon. And I got it delivered to my house last night, and I felt so taken care of and so seen by the restaurant because they found a way to offer the same level of service in my home as they would have in the restaurant. And I felt very understood. Like, it's okay that you don't feel coming out quite yet. We're gonna bring it to you. One thing I haven't seen yet that I'm kind of surprised that I haven't seen is restaurants just calling people to kind of check in on them and literally say to their best patrons and their favorite guests, like, how you doing? I know it seems very personal, but to me it doesn't seem ridiculous. I think everybody wants to ask, everyone wants to be asked how they're doing right now and to be seen in that way. So, Stephen, I don't know when people are coming back, but I do know there's more and more opportunities for an industry that's about hospitality to extend it in different ways.
Great. And just a follow-up question from Stephen. So, obviously, you can't let us know when people will come back, but how can we make guests feel more comfortable and encourage them to come back?
Slowly, and I think in any way imaginable. Again, like, try to check in with people, extend more communication, tell people the story of what you're doing, use your social media channels. Don't wait for, stories in legacy media to come out, put new things up on your website, get on the radio, be on podcasts, share more pictures, show what you're doing. Don't be afraid to talk about, the nitty gritty of health and inspections and the way restaurants work. I think showing some of the behind the scenes is important in regaining people's trust. But I think it's hard to resist delicious food. So I think once people start tasting things again, maybe you'll have that almost cartoon, thing where people follow the wafting smell back into the restaurant. It was really nice to have that restaurant quality meal at home last night. And I think being able to get things in different ways is really important. So do delivery, set people up with picnics, do, low touch takeout service in a really interesting way. Be creative in ways that you always were as a restaurant, just with the understanding that it's going to take some time and patience to maybe get people to sit down. That doesn't mean they won't pay what they paid for an in-person meal if it's served some other way somewhere else. I'm seeing restaurants that charge a fair amount for their food be very successful with this model. I know restaurants who have literally had their best performance days ever during COVID doing carryout, and it's because they've offered something truly delicious and exceptional and have reacted to an extraordinary time by creating something extraordinary. So I think the short answer is just give and give and give. I know it's perhaps an exhausting proposition, but you can charge for it. It's still capitalistic in nature.
Awesome, thanks. So I'll come back in about 5 minutes with some more questions, and just for the nick of time, just get you to continue on with your slideshow.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm gonna move on from the health and safety part of the conversation, and you guys can check out these resources, these websites. If you haven't copied it down, you can go to the Momofuku website or the World Central Kitchen website, and these things are pretty easy to find. Okay, so my next point, one thing we've talked about on the show over and over again is equity and openness, and realizing that the people who are coming back to work might see things in a different way than when they left work, in terms of feeling safe, in terms of wanting to help create more equitable, more diverse, more employee-centric models of running a restaurant business. I think that one of the things we saw in all of this, when restaurants shut down, a lot of restaurateurs I talked to were in this horrible position of not knowing how to take care of the people who had worked for them for so long, and have now been invested in rebuilding different kinds of systems across their workplaces that will help ensure that people feel more taken care of within the workplace and will be protected in a more demonstrable way in case things shut down again. One of the really interesting restaurant operators I came across during my reporting is from Boston, and her name is Irene Lee. She runs a restaurant called Mei Mei, which is delicious Chinese food. And Irene does a really interesting thing with her restaurant. It's really radical, and it's not for everybody. And I can't suggest everybody run the restaurant in the same way as Irene, but I like to use her as an example of trying to do something completely different, to create a workplace where people are going to stick with her, and they're going to stay on, and they're going to want to move up through the ranks and work in a system that they feel is working for them. Irene runs an open book management company, which means everybody has full visibility of the business's finances, from what Irene makes to how much Irene pays for dish towels. They have training so people can understand the language of restaurant finances. They all read their profit and loss statements together. They incentivize and encourage people who work in every part of the restaurant to provide ideas for how the restaurant can become more profitable and have fewer losses, which is cool. So the person in the dish room can talk to the general manager about the kind of soap they're using, or can see something on the floor that they think can be revised in a different way. And I think what Irene's created that's really interesting is this brain trust, where she believes her restaurant is better from having created the space where everybody has a voice. I think that's really fascinating. And it's also a way that, restaurant can show that it cares about the community that it's in. It's not just about caring for diners or being able to pay the rent to stay in business. It's about showing that you care about the people who work for you. One of the things that's important to me going back into restaurants as a diner is I do want to know that the people who work in these places are taken care of, because they work so hard. It's a demanding job. It's a job that requires tremendous presence and a lot of energy, and you really have to show up. So I think we're going to see more restaurateurs also being transparent about the things they do and will do to take care of the people who work for them, whether it's profit sharing or an employee fund or different kinds of management training. I think this is something that will become a trend in restaurants as much as anything regarding food innovation or the way a restaurant looks or design. I think it's going to be an important piece of the total picture, and I think diners will be watching, and the press certainly will too. So it's definitely part of the story during COVID, and will be more part of the story after it as well. Another way food businesses can be part of the community, which has been a big part of what's come out of this pandemic, is donation models. Restaurants figuring out ways to get food to people who need food the most. There's a few things we've been watching here where different nonprofits have been incentivizing restaurants to bring back their staff, paying for their staff to return, paying for their food costs, so the restaurant gets to be open, people get to have their jobs, food gets to be made, and it's just going to a different audience. It's going to people who need to eat. There's been a food crisis because of this public health crisis as well, and that's ongoing. One example I really like to use and like to talk about is Mira Kitchen Collective, which is a Baltimore-based organization that's not a brick and mortar restaurant and hasn't been at any time during its existence. But what it is it's a group of immigrant women who have been spreading culture through their cuisines in Baltimore in various ways for the last several years. They've been a farmer's market stand. They've been event caterers. They've had pop-ups. You're looking at Chef Iman here. She's one of the founding members of the group. She's a Syrian immigrant who came to Baltimore in 2016, and the food that she makes and some of the food that's inspired by her traditions and her cohorts is the food that's gone out to the community in Baltimore by the thousands during this time. They have a grant, I believe, from World Central Kitchen to operate. So they've found the funding to make thousands and thousands of meals. And they're also going to start exploring some models that will help bring in revenue for them so they can continue to exist in however, food service businesses can exist. So whether it's takeout meals from the different members representing their cuisines, to retail products, to spice blends, to to-go food, this will be a business where you see community service and gains for their own organization within the same body. It's a really cool thing to watch. They're one of our shows, and I highly recommend listening to that and following them at Mirror Kitchen Collective, whether or not that's something you can do in your own organization or it's a kind of business elsewhere that you can help team up with. I think these sorts of partnerships will also be lasting parts of the COVID-19 story, where traditional for-profit restaurants link up with community groups to create something really special for everybody. I think that's going to be part of the future of the legacy of restaurants, big and small. Another thing that's really important that came up during the questions is having a really strong tech platform. This episode with Nick Kokonis. Nick is the founder of Talk, which is an online platform which before COVID-19 dealt in dinner reservations. You'd book a dinner, usually somewhere pretty upscale. They would handle the booking. They would handle the point of service. You'd pay through them. You'd have a ticket. You'd have a great meal. You'd go, and that would be it. Talk was great in this way. When COVID-19 started, Talk became a resource in all different ways. It started serving restaurants at all different levels. It now works with wineries, it works with farms, and what it provides is a strong and well-designed interface for the public to get what they need from the restaurants they want to experience. Nick's also an owner of the Alinea Group in Chicago, and Alinea is one of those restaurants that was doing a massive amount of takeaway really early on because they changed their many course tasting menu to something people could take home. And Chicago was really excited by it, and they had some of their best days of profit ever during this time. But what I like about Talk is Nick has made the experience for restaurant owners reasonably priced as well. So there's not a lot of built-in fees that just take and take and take. I think there's the idea that the more you all survive, the more his business is able to, survive and help as well. So I think having really strong digital partners, if you're not able to do the back end of that on your own, which some people are, is really critical. I think for me or any other restaurant diner to be able to pick up their phone and have a meaningful commercial exchange with a restaurant is really important. Strong graphics, easy payment, consistent updates. I don't think I can state the importance of this enough, really. One person who has done it all really on his own, from creating this kind of tech backend to beautiful graphic design, with his own partners within his organization, who's really interesting to look at, is a chef named Eric Rivera from Seattle, whose restaurant is called Ado. Well, it's called Otto, actually. It's spelled A-D-D-O, pronounced Otto. And it's always been this lab for culinary experimentation, and the concept's always shifted. It's always been the idea of what Eric does. But during this pandemic, he has shown that every part of your skill set as chefs, as restaurateurs, and as creatives can be part of your bottom line. All of your skills are your commodities. All of your resources are your commodities. And any idea you have can perhaps, with the right research and presentation, become a product. Eric has spice mixes. He has a a mail order butcher business. He's selling fish direct to consumers. He's selling fruit. He's involved with online gaming and is creating interactive experiences that people can have on their computers to eat alongside his food. He has a donation model where meals have gone out to organizations and nonprofits all over Seattle. He's used his collection of books as a library so people can borrow them. He's doing online cooking classes. It's really like a new thing every day, or several new things every day with him. He's really good at the graphic design part. He's really good at the social media use. And his food's really interesting and evolving. So I think Eric has shown, perhaps better and more frequently than anybody, that the idea of the restaurant is an infinite idea. I think it's the most hopeful thing I've seen. I think it's the most limitless thing I've seen. And it's one of my favorite things to kind of watch. It's almost like, what is Eric Rivera going to do today? So it's very much the opposite of this idea I think we've always had for a restaurant, where we go, we expect them to do this thing, we want them to do perfectly, they do it perfectly, and then we go back. There's something very exciting to see a chef whose creativity is just on fire. And I think there's more opportunity for that in the future too. So that's my last slide. We have about 15 minutes left for questions. I'd love to answer whatever you want to throw at me. Thank you guys so much for listening, for being here. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much, Howie, up to this point. So we have a couple questions, and I just want to encourage anyone else who has any questions to please use the Q&A function in Zoom, and I will ask Howie these questions. So here's one question from Raul. So what are some ways a new business that's just getting started to enter the market with everything going on? We used to do farmers markets, but we've pivoted to frozen food delivery and pickup, but we still want to open a spot. Maybe we stay overhead free longer, or we look for a spot that's smaller, that's geared towards takeout and delivery.
Well, I think it's a really interesting time to negotiate with people who own the real estate. I don't know who's gonna want space now, who's gonna be willing to invest in spaces. So in a lot of ways, now is perhaps a good time to get a deal in a part of town that maybe you wouldn't have been able to access before, or maybe you can get a bigger space than you were before, or maybe 3 smaller spaces. It's definitely an interesting time to have a conversation about real estate. That said, it's definitely a time where it's a risk, but when is opening a restaurant not a risk? I think if you have the funds and you have the vision, it's definitely an interesting time to open. And I think if your program's on point, if your food's on point, if your digital's on point, your safety, your marketing is on point, and you're able to keep everybody who works within your wall safe, I think there's a real shot. I mean, even throughout a pandemic, people have to eat. I think that my food ordering, the stuff I mail ordered from the months, during March, April, May, I mail ordered things I never even thought of eating before. So I think certain kinds of food folks are game to participate. I think the other part of the coin that's kind of difficult to predict is what this is going to do for other people's jobs and how much money people are going to have to spend on things. But I think there are different ways to open restaurants now that weren't available before, both from a real estate perspective and from a conceptual perspective. I think people are going to expect something different in a way they wouldn't before. I think they'll be open to something different in a way they weren't before. And again, you might have the opportunity to pick up some property that you couldn't get before.
Yeah, really good points. Thank you. So we have one more here. So Steve asked us a bit earlier. So restaurants ran on very low margins to start off with.
Right.
Competition was fierce, seating will be reduced going forward, and volumes have decreased and are not foreseen to increase soon.
Mm-hmm.
Will selling prices have to increase, and will consumers accept this?
I've long advocated from episode 1 of my show and before for the prices of food in restaurants to go up. And I know this because I know what the margins of restaurants are and what makes a restaurateur happy at the end of the year, skating by on a very thin, razor thin profit margin. As somebody who eats in restaurants and understands the way they work, I am in support of raising prices. I think it's fine. I think I'm okay with that because I understand why. So I think there's some disconnect between what customers think go on in a restaurant and what actually goes on in a restaurant. I think there's some key to raising prices that involves being better about really telling the story of what happens. And that pressure's not all on you. It's also on media, it's also on social media to make everything look like not a heroic dreamscape of chefs coming to everybody's rescue with deliciousness, but a real picture of the work that goes into this and why prices might need to increase. I think people will pay more if they kind of realize the survival of the very thing they want to participate in is at stake.
Great. Another question here. So any advice for restaurants who are highly dependent on catering for office tenants and large corporate events?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think that the concept of the office as we know it is one of these things during the pandemic that's just absolutely been shattered, in a million different pieces. So I think that there's big companies in the US that are talking about their people not going back to the office at all till mid 2021. I mean, that's a year, it's a year from now. So I would say diversify. I would say figure out a way to take your hits and make it available to the public at large, to do the things that have always worked best for you and that people like best, to figure out a way to sell them online. If you have a catering company, you have a catering kitchen and the ability to make food. You also might have some extra space and some times in which your kitchen's not being used. So, maybe it's time to start an incubator where you take money from some other people who are starting other operations and use it as a lease operation. Maybe it's a way of figuring out how to get into grocery stores and other kinds of local, food markets. Maybe it's having more of a direct consumer presence. I think being able to cook for larger and mass audiences in a consistent way is a really interesting skill to have, and one that perhaps lends well to doing the same thing, but just for a different segment of the population. I also think if you're a caterer, you could probably also be a meal kit provider and put together something that lasts a family for a week as opposed to lasts an office for a day. It's a logistics thing, right? Catering companies are really good at getting X number of meals to X number of people in X amount of time. So if you kind of peel back what you do to the essence of what you do, the formula of what you do, it's not just about catering for offices, even though that's where your revenue's been previously. Also, I think as long as schools are shut down, figuring out ways to get lunches to people is an interesting thing too.
Absolutely. There's a question here from Steve. So what are your thoughts on what will happen to the buffet concept as we know it in restaurants, resorts, and cruise ships, etc.?
I think there's going to be a segment of the population that just doesn't care, and that's very much the people who aren't going to wear masks and think public safety is a myth. And then there's going to be people who will never go to a buffet again. So I think a buffet is a dice roll from a business perspective, but I think it would be a tremendous statement from a public health perspective. I don't see that business going forward in a meaningful way. I don't see lots of different people going up to trays of food that have been sitting there, giving a lot of people the chance to access them. Not right now. I think from a business point of view, there's got to be another way to do it. There's got to be packaging that works. I think the buffet perhaps is a concept that has met its end.
Great. A couple more questions here. So Stephen Becta asks, so what is the best example of fine dining takeout / delivery that you've seen?
Okay, so I think what Alinia's done is really incredible. I think the quality of the food that I've seen come out of there is really special. I think what the Canlises have done in Seattle, applying essentially fine dining technique to all sorts of different kinds of meal options, has been really interesting. They've now opened an outdoor crab shack for the summer. The food it looks absolutely bananas. One of the coolest things I've seen has been from Blue Hill at Stone Barns, which is Dan Barber's farm and restaurant a little bit outside of New York City, where he's really been able to leverage a lot of the stuff he grows in conjunction with a lot of the stuff he makes to make these really beautiful boxes that are both prepared foods and farm boxes. And I think getting as much to people as you can is a really valuable thing, because then people have to work less to get their groceries, essentially. So can a fine dining restaurant offer a grocery experience on top of the things that they're already cooking? Another thing that was really beautiful is there's a restaurant in Singapore called Odette. The chef there is Julian Royer, and it's run by the Lo and Behold group, who runs really beautiful restaurants in Singapore. And they really did their menu. I mean, they really did their like Michelin 3-star menu for takeout. And of course, I'm not in Singapore and wasn't able to eat it, but just the way they were putting it together and watching it on social media was so cool, because they just continue to be really ambitious from a gastronomic point of view. Another person who's just totally taken pandemic cuisine to a new level is Josh Nyland, who's from Sydney, Australia, and who runs the fish butchery. The food he's made is just, and he's converted this whole restaurant too to sort of change from what it was to what it has to be in this time. If you don't follow Mr. Nyland on Instagram, you should. I mean, it's just like a fantasy of food, regardless of whether he's cooking from his book or plating stuff for a pandemic. It's just been really an extraordinary exercise of the imagination to watch. His restaurant's called St. Peter as well.
I love that term.
Yeah.
Cuisine. So we're approaching 4:00 in 4 minutes. So there's 2 more questions, and then maybe we could wrap it up after then.
Great.
So another question coming in from Raul. So Eric's story was super cool. What are your thoughts on at-home experiences and monetizing that as a creative avenue? Have you seen instances where this has worked amazingly?
I love it. I mean, I think it's a way of saying, it's a way of restaurant people saying to people who want to stay at home, like, I'm in this with you. I support and encourage you staying home, which has public health benefits. And I'm also going to try to create something really special for you on many different levels. Like Eric's created, date nights that work really well. He's created things that are based on time travel novels. He's done things that involve like tents and living rooms and indoor camping for families. So I think being able to do that kinds of storytelling, I think it would totally work. I think people are missing the experiences that they would have in a normal time, and they are missing, the experience of being able to travel somewhere, being able to, and here's the thing, I'm in New York. If I wanted to do one of Eric's online experiences, all he has to do is send me the box of food, and all I have to do is plug in my computer and turn on his feed. And I think that's really cool, because it's a way for me to travel, which is something I miss doing dearly. You know what? I'm not even allowed in Canada right now as an American citizen. So I'm down to go anywhere virtually.
Awesome. Well, we're happy to have you virtually.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and the final question coming in from Greg here. So what are your thoughts about improvising a more technical approach with contactless menu, direct ordering, and payment directly from the table? It would mean less interaction with servers, but in the medium to lower end restaurants, more bums and seats is the key.
I think that kind of context really important. I think it'll make everybody less skittish. I think it might be a way to get people to slowly start experiencing restaurants again. And I also think, the fewer points of contact during a meal, the faster people are going to get in and out of the restaurant anyways. If you have a server come to a table 9 times during a meal as opposed to 1, the meal's going to go a lot faster. So I think there's your butts and seats part of it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for answering all these questions.
Thank you for the questions. And
looks like we have about a minute left. I feel like people are going to hop off the call. So I'll pass it over to Sonia Shorey. So thank you so much, Howie. It was nice meeting you.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Kyle. Incredibly impressive. So much actionable insight, Howie. I have scribbled so many notes. We're going to be creating a blog that tries to capture all of that insight and get it out to all the restaurateurs that have joined us today. That online experience, that virtual experience Howie described, Digital Main Street is here to help you create that, all free for you. I can't emphasize enough how excited we are. We are still building this program, and I want to do a big shout out to our investors that make it all possible. FedDev Ontario, Government of Canada, the Province of Ontario, together with our partners across the province and the teams inside of West Ottawa that are working diligently around the clock to get them all developed, ramped, and promoted. Our venture development team led by Nick Quain, our marketing and communications team, which is doing incredible work together with them. We are here to help you. digitalmainstreet.ca. You have my email address in the chat. We have a new roundtable tomorrow. We would love to see those restaurateurs that want to be a part of that roundtable, that peer group support, join us. And your next special Inside Edge is going to be available with Craig Patterson, Tuesday, August 25th at 2 p.m. So just like we brought you Howie today, we're bringing somebody who specialized in the retail space to help you recover and look for new ways to build that business. We know that we all know incredible retailers across our region, and we hope some have actually joined us today. Please reach out to us. Let us know how we can help you. Thank you again, Howie. Thank you to all the Main Street companies who have joined us and to the team that put it together. Wishing you a great day. We will be sharing this very soon. Bye for now.